Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, April 5th. Hatsqualawin, Queestaluknamuk, Squamish, Okameo. We are privileged to be meeting and doing our work tonight on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Council, motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Herford. Any opposed? Motion carries. Council, any notice of motion? Seeing none. We have two proclamation requests this evening. First up is Bob Smith from Public Works. Go ahead when you're ready, Bob.
Sorry about that. I lost comms for a second there. So good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm here tonight to talk about Public Works Week proclamation. I would like to, I'm hoping to get a recommendation through Council that Council proclaim the week of May 15th to May 21st, 2022 as Public Works Week in the District of Squamish. Mary Elliott, can I provide a bit of background to our request?
Please go ahead.
So contrary to the report, we've actually won 10 provincial and national awards, not 6. So we're pretty proud bunch down in Public Works for the work we've done with this. That's a positive note. The negative side to that is we can't have the school kids this year. We've decided that that's just not going to work with COVID. So we're a little bummed out about that one. But I popped into the Public Works meeting, the committee meeting today, and the group's got some really good plans to do some work with the public. They're talking about a day, evening, perhaps a weekend meeting to have a bit of an open house at Public Works. And we're also looking to do a bit of a staff meeting one of the days where we can bring some folks down on their lunch break and teach them about source control and water conservation and all that good stuff. So we've got some things planned. We're a little bummed out about not having the kids there, but hopefully next year we can do that. In regards to budget, we've got a budget request for $2,500. I'm sure we'll be well under that, if not zero, because we're not doing a lot of the stuff that we normally do. So that's where we're at on that. Is there any questions in regards to this year's Public Works Week proclamation?
Thank you, Mr. Smith. This may be your last official appearance before council before you retire, so I'm glad you joined us. So council, any questions or perhaps any comments? Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Mr. Smith, for your service to the district and for that of your whole department. I think if ever there was a year for people to appreciate Public Works, it's been this last year. The Public Works Department has really quite literally saved us in terms of flooding and some of the natural disasters and things we've faced, and things could have been quite a lot worse here were it not for this department. So can't thank everyone enough for that, and very happy to support this year. Thank you.
Councillor Race.
Thank you. Technics. So actually, I mentioned it to Bob just before the meeting started, but I'll repeat it for the public that I've really enjoyed working with you over the last years and the Public Works Day, the Public Works Weeks, actually. But it's been great, and you've done a great service to our community, and I want to thank you for that. I've also missed the Public Works Week over the last couple of years where we've sort of been housebound with COVID and so forth, and I hope certainly that the t-shirts are in the budget this year, because I got to tell you, it leaves a huge gap in my spring wardrobe when I don't get those things. So anyway, all the best to you in your, I don't know if it's retirement or not, but all the best to you in the future.
Thank you.
Councillor Stoner, and then Councillor Herford.
Thank you, through the chair. Happy to support the proclamation request. I am still really bummed because the first year I was away and missed the Public Works Yard celebrations, and then COVID hit, and so they haven't happened since. So I'm excited to hear that there might be some open houses at the very least, but we won't get the school groups, which will be a little bit sad. But have always really appreciated the reports and the innovation that comes from the team in terms of how to celebrate. The mini series of videos last year was fantastic. So just, hats off to your team and to your leadership for that team over the years. As my colleagues have said, it's been a real pleasure working with you. And the leadership that you've provided to that team has definitely shown through, especially in this past year. So thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Councilor Hurford.
Thank you. I was lucky enough to attend the I think it was the last time the kids were there in 2019, and but I'm happy to see the return to some sort of celebration and education elements on the public works yard, as it's much needed in our community to understand the hows and the whys of various things that are happening throughout our community. So I'm excited to see the return of that, and congratulations on all the awards for your past efforts for this. And I look forward to another hopefully award-winning season of Public Works Week. And it has been a pleasure working with you. And honestly, it's been we don't see you very much because things just work there. So I think that's a testament to your leadership and the crew there. So thank you very much for that work, and I look forward to seeing what you put together for Public Works Week this year. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, Bob, thank you for coming. Oh, go ahead, Councilor French.
Well, I was just going to say I'll move the recommendation, but if you wish to say your piece, go ahead, and I can do that after.
Bob, I couldn't let the opportunity go by to not let people tell you how they feel about your departure from the district. I know the Public Works celebration was always a favorite part of the year for me, whether my time as a councillor or as mayor. So I've certainly missed it. You know, I always tell people when there's natural disasters going on, I do manage to sleep at night because we have such an outstanding team at the district, and certainly the leadership you've provided to create such a dedicated public works team doesn't go unnoticed. And you know, every time I meet someone from the public works team, I can see their dedication. I can see their sense of professionalism, but also they have a lot of fun too. And I think that's what makes Public Works Week and the day that we usually celebrate with kids just so unique. And I think that's why it's award winning, because it just speaks to the depth and the knowledge in that team, but also that they're willing to have a bit of fun and help other people see this sort of intriguing and important side of public works that many may take for granted, you know, when they turn on their taps or flush their toilet or sleep at night when we have atmospheric river after atmospheric river. And there's definitely people behind the scenes working 24/7 to make sure that those things all happen for us as community members. So thank you for your leadership. You will be missed. But I'm so glad I have had these 2 terms to work with you. So Councilor French.
Yes, I'd like to move the recommendation, and I'll speak to it if I can get a seconder.
Second by Councilor Race. Go ahead, Councilor French.
Thank you, Mayor. So in light of the rejection of the alternative approval process aimed at delivering a new public works building to the operations department, Bob, I'm honored to move this motion and to declare Public Works Week in Squamish. And in doing so, I'll share my observation that in the time before your arrival, Bob, the Works Department seemed to have a level of anxiety. You brought a calm to the position. And I think that the community of Squamish has benefited from that. So thank you, and know that your shoes will be difficult to fill. And to the folks who make sure that our drinking water is clean, that our roads are maintained, the sewage is treated, the flood pumps are tested, and snow is removed from our roads, they do good work every day under challenging conditions, and they deserve the recognition for the long hours that they log. And it's a great opportunity for the community to recognize all of that during this particular week.
All right.
Great. Thank
With
you so
that,
much for
I
your
will-
kind words.
Well, I've got to call the vote. Hold on a second. Any opposed? Motion carries. Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
I just wanted to say thank you for your kind words, Mayor and Council. I appreciate it. It's been a great ride. I've really enjoyed my time in Squamish. It's a great place to work, and yeah, there's a solid team down there. They're good. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Okay. Proclamation request number 2 is from Diana Gunstone with the Squamish Nonprofit Network. And we may not be able to give you as much love as we gave to Bob Smith, but we definitely want to hear from you tonight, Ms. Gunstone. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, and district staff. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here. And want to say that my name is Diana Gunstone. I'm here as a volunteer with the Squamish Nonprofit Network, which is a very loose organization of nonprofits in our community. And I'm here to request another proclamation for the week of April 24th to the 30th, which is National Volunteer Week in Canada. As our community grows and changes, we believe that it's very important to celebrate and grow this community's culture of volunteerism and volunteering. The week, as far as National Volunteer Week is concerned, it's set aside each year to thank and recognize all the volunteers around our community and also around Canada for the time and the energy that they contribute to the causes that they care about, the causes and the benefits to our communities. It's also an opportunity to promote the benefits of volunteering and to both individuals and to society. So this year, the theme for National Volunteer Week is volunteering is empathy in action. And the idea to affirm the strong connection between volunteerism and empathy, and that this profoundly human connection is at the heart of healthier individuals and stronger communities. It's a quality that helps people relate to others, to build awareness around different experiences. It connects people to ideas, to actions, and it helps create bonds forged on common goals and aspirations. And so from coast to coast to coast, informal and informal settings, volunteers create caring and collaborative and compassionate communities. And that is a belief of our Squamish Nonprofit Network. And so this year, we're very excited. We've got a small team together that are planning the April 30th celebration, which we will be hosting at the OCM Pavilion at Junction Park. And it's a community celebration outdoors with also a nonprofit fair. It'll take place on the 30th from 1:30 to 3:30, so just a 2-hour window where we'll have, right now there's currently 13 organizations or clubs, community nonprofits that have registered to host a table, and we're still recruiting and we have space for more. And we also have opened up this stage and we are looking to get volunteers to share stories, to share poetry, to share music, to share dance, and or a performance for this celebration. So that is currently a work in progress. We've engaged a graphic recorder who will help us to capture the stories for those that may not want to step up on stage, but would like to share. And we've been very grateful. We are grateful to the Community Foundation who have supported our application for a community enhancement grant. So in addition to the request for proclamation, I do have 3 invitations. And I would be delighted if any of the district staff, mayor, or council would like to come out and participate either on stage or informally to visit our tables and share some stories. And also I wanted to ask if the district was interested in hosting a table, if there are volunteers that they would like to celebrate from various initiatives, whether it's through the Recreation Center or the Go by Bike Week or Pitch-In Week, certainly welcome to have a table as well. And our second invitation is to perhaps collaborate with us to promote through your communication channels, through the electronic emails and updates, possibly in the chief. We do have a small budget for that ourselves as well. And I do know that the chief will be hosting a National Volunteer Week supplement, as they traditionally have in our community. And lastly, we did have a request, and I don't know if this is something perhaps I have to take to the communications group, but it's about a banner and whether there's a possibility to have a banner across Cleveland Street to celebrate our community volunteers during National Volunteer Week. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Gunstone. Thanks for being here tonight. This is such an important topic, and communities work because people volunteer. They're the heart of the community for sure. Before I go to council, is there a staff member present that can tell Ms. Gunstone who she needs to speak to about a banner? Oh, no. Mr. Buxton can speak to you afterwards if you'd like, Ms. Gunstone. Okay, council. Councilor Hereford is moving the proclamation request for April 24th to 23rd as National Volunteer Week in the District of Squamish. It's seconded by Councilor Anderson. Go ahead, Councilor Hereford.
Thank you for bringing this forward and for all your volunteer work and wrangling all the volunteers in the in your network. Well, I know that it's a challenge, and but it's also so rewarding to volunteer and to see these various projects come to light. And volunteers are very important to our community in all sorts of ways that we don't even know, because they're busy just working away, and it's amazing. So thank you so much for bringing this forward, and I look forward to seeing what the festivities entail for April 24th to 30th. So thank you very much.
Councilor Anderson.
I'm very glad to see this volunteer week get this promotion here this evening, but also some profile for the Squamish Nonprofit Network. And I was involved in the early days of getting this launched, and I've seen consistent efforts ongoing through email channels. Unfortunately, Ms. Gunstone, your meetings are held during our Council Tuesday. Otherwise, I'm sure that I and a number of my colleagues might be interested to drop by once in a while. You may give that some consideration, but you're doing great work as the Squamish Nonprofit Network. Thank you.
Councilor French, Stoner, Pettengill.
Thanks, Mayor. And in supporting the motion, I'll just throw some of my own social media support behind the event. I'll certainly post it a number of times between now and then, and hope that some of my testamental friends who actually had a gathering the other night, will probably be the last formal Test of Metal gathering, as the person, Cliff Miller, who spearheaded that effort, is moving out of town. But nonetheless, there are still lots of Test of Metal volunteers here, and I'm sure at least a few of them will attend the event. So good luck with it, and thanks for coming to us to allow us this proclamation.
Councilor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you so much for being here, Ms. Gunstone. I'm happy to support the proclamation. The event last year that you were able to host virtually on Zoom was fantastic as well, just to hear the stories of how volunteerism impacts people both personally as well as supporting their community. And I really love this year's theme of volunteerism is empathy in action, because I think that captures it so nicely. So I look forward to joining you on April 30th at the event. I know that there are so many nonprofits in our community that are looking for help, and both through the nonprofit network and through events like this are good ways to connect people to those opportunities. So thank you for doing the work that you do.
Councilor Pettengill.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing this forward. It is such an important thing to celebrate. Volunteers are the heart of our community. I don't think, or I would say very few people, if any, get on council if volunteerism isn't pretty deep in the core of who and what you are about. Maybe that's, I don't know, I guess, good or bad thing. I'd like to think of it as a good thing. And I was planning to mention just a little concrete example. I was going to, in the council update, mention Between Shifts Theater, and I may touch on that again at the end of the meeting, but that's just a wonderful example of volunteers putting great culture and entertainment and so on into our community. And there's just so many examples of that. And just so glad for what you're doing and what all the volunteers in this community are doing. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. We look forward to celebrating with you, Ms. Gunstone, and staff will follow up on the other pieces. All right, council, item 5, consideration of unscheduled public attendance. So this is anyone participating online or here in the gallery that feels they have an item for council to consider that cannot wait 2 weeks until the next agenda. Seeing none, we will move on. And we don't have anything under item 6, public hearings, or 7. So we're moving on to item 8. And this is first reading official community plan amendment to extend the growth management boundary and redesignate district lots 509 and 510 to residential neighborhood. And I'll introduce Mr. Valniskis to take the floor.
Thank you. I'm just going to quickly pull up my presentation and hopefully it works. Excellent. Good evening, Council. My name is Jonas Valniskis, Director of Community Planning. And tonight I will be presenting the first reading consideration for Bylaw 2905, which is an OCP amendment. So I gotta scroll a bit. So for context, this is a property known as District Lot 509 and 510. Located just north of the Garibaldi Highlands. It's a large property, 170 hectares, 420 acres approximately. Greenfield site. A little bit of context. So the current designation in terms of land use is future residential neighborhoods. The land is currently located outside of the growth management boundary. So it's right on the boundary of the of our growth management boundary in the Garibaldi Highlands. Some background, we did have previous applications made for this property. So back in 2017 and then subsequently in 2020, they were the same applications essentially as what we have in front of us today. And this application was submitted at the end of 2021. There was a public information meeting held last month by the applicant. And here we are today considering the amendment. So there's 2 parts to this application. The first one is to extend the growth management boundary and include all of the lands within it. And the second one is to redesignate the lands from future residential neighborhood to residential neighborhood, which essentially would allow consideration of a rezoning or some form of development on the lands. So as we did in 2017 and in 2021 or 2020, this is a high-level policy review analysis. And as you can see, there are a number of growth management policies in the OCP that directly relate to expansion of the growth management boundary. And those are located in section 9.2. So overall, while there is some compliance with the policies, the application is not able to address all of them at this time. Namely, policy 9.2H, which is precursor policies to be completed. So there's a list of policies that need to be completed before the district can consider whether to expand the boundary or not. So in essence, It is the question of whether the district is ready to undertake an application proposing to expand the growth management boundary from a policy perspective. And I'll dive a little deeper into that one in previous slides. There are a number of policies that relate to policy 9.2F, which says that despite not reaching a population target of 34,000, which is sort of the target for future expansions, expansions can be considered if you meet section 9.2G and H. And so H is the policies, and G is the consideration of negative impacts associated with boundary expansions. So if those two policies can be satisfied, then the district can consider expansion before we reach that population target. So in terms of compliance with 9.2H, which is kind of the dominant policy to begin the consideration, the brand asset inventory, this is the list of policies that need to be completed. So the brand asset inventory, it's underway. For these lands, it is something that the Squamish Off-Road Cycling Association is undertaking, and it is related to mountain biking assets on the property. The community amended contribution policy has been completed. It is under review this year, so that will inform any future considerations. We do have our perpetually affordable housing policy completed. The missing middle housing policy and regulations, those are considered completed as part of the zoning bylaw update process in the last couple of years. An updated wildfire protection plan has been completed. And finally, the steep slopes development permit area, which is slated to be presented for consideration in the 2023 budget. So that project is going to start, if we get the budget for it, in the next year. So this is kind of the critical policy, and you can see that it's, although a lot of it is done or underway, there is still one item that needs to initiate. So every time we get a request to expand the growth management boundary, we have to consider what is our growth outlook and whether the growth that we're seeing can be accommodated within our growth management boundary, and for approximately how long. So there will be a point in time where we will need those future residential neighborhoods to come in to the growth management boundary to accommodate residential growth. So we know that our population now in 2021 has reached over 24,000. We are under a fairly high growth rate, 22% over the last 5 years. And we also took a look at our building projects that get to a building permit stage. And that's when you know that the project is, there's really high likelihood that the project is going to start. So it means it's gone through the probably rezoning stage, development permit stage, and it's now at building permit stage. And so in that same period, when we experienced the growth rate of 22%, we took a look at how many projects, how many residential units got to the building permit stage, and that is the 3,225 dwelling units, which equates to approximately 8,000 population-wise. So that is, those dwelling units can accommodate, by Canadian household standards, a population of 8,000, which is well above of our growth rate for population. We know that if we continue along this path of higher growth rate, we will need to plan for 10 to 12,000 people over the next decade. So we took a look at, okay, well, where is this growth going to land within the growth management boundary? And we do have a number of large and medium-sized projects and areas, including the downtown. And downtown is the only neighborhood where we assume that there's going to be some infill happening. And so if we assume nothing else other than there's going to be infill downtown and these bigger projects are going ahead, and some of them are already underway, all of them have zoning in place, which means, except for Loggers East, which has a neighborhood plan to guide zoning. So just between those projects and a conservative estimate for growth downtown for infill, it does look like we could accommodate up to 17,000 population-wise just looking at those projects and downtown, which suggests that our housing supply outlook is sufficient to accommodate growth for the next decade. This doesn't mean that, as stated in the report, that these lands are going to be immediately available once the district decides, okay, well, we need these lands to feed the housing supply. There will be a long ramp up stage to get these houses to the point where this land to the point where it's producing housing. But we're at least a few years away from that point of having to start planning for it, essentially. In preparation for this meeting, we did get a few questions from council, so I put them up here, and maybe we'll just quickly go through it. One question was, at one point in the process, would council and the public be able to look at the proposed project and the merits of it? So the public has seen the preliminary proposal for the public information meeting last month. And really, once council determines that the consideration of the growth management boundary expansion is warranted and the district is ready to consider such requests, then we will start looking at the actual merits of the project. And as I said before, that policy 9.2H really is critical to get to the point where the district is ready to consider the request. Another question, when does a project lock into the community management contribution policy of the day? So typically it's at the rezoning stage. When the rezoning reaches public hearing and then adoption stage, that's when normally we will lock in the amenities, if there are any amenities offered. I think with the growth management boundary expansions, it's likely that this will be a two-part process where there's some commitment for amenities in the expansion process and some commitment to amenities in the neighborhood planning process. And then finally, those would get secured in the rezoning process. And some of it might get secured in the previous steps as well. But I think this is going to be a multi-phase approach to securing amenities. Because there's such a big timeline difference between when the application actually starts in terms of consideration of growth management expansion to the point where the rezoning is adopted, that may be a 4 or 5 year process in between those 2 points. And what we have seen in BC and across the country is the real estate values changing really quickly. And it's likely that, in those 4 years, we're going to do an update to our community amenity contribution policy again. So we wouldn't want to make sure that, that amenity package locking in is delayed till the adoption stage in the rezoning process. A recap of steep slopes development permit area policy funding or sponsoring. So the applicant in the past has offered to fund the steep slopes development permit area policy. And we had entered into agreement at one point for them to fund it. However, we realized that there is no capacity from a staff perspective to take that on in the short term. And that's why we've scheduled the project for 2023. We're going to propose it in the budget, and I suspect that it will come forward as a district project funded by the district rather than funded by a developer. And then finally, please provide context on the OCP amendment process and how OCP policy 9.2G is expected to be implemented. And so in italics there at the bottom right-hand corner is the 9.2G policy, which is to consider whether there are negative environmental, social, or economic impacts that cannot be adequately mitigated or offset. And this is directly relating to growth management boundary expansion. And so on the left there, I've laid out the process for development approvals when there's a growth management boundary expansion involved. So first is the expansion application, and we know that would be 2 years or so. Timing wise, and 9.2G is really going to be most relevant at that point. That's when 9.2G applies to growth management expansions, and so it's going to be most relevant at that first stage in the process. The second stage will be neighborhood planning, and the 9.2G is still relevant, but now we're looking at taking a more detailed approach to looking at the land. After that, it's a rezoning process, and sometimes the rezoning process will start as the neighborhood planning is kind of coming to an end, so there can be some overlap between the two. Once the rezoning is complete, we're getting into development permitting for subdivision and subdivision. So those two processes happen in parallel often. And then finally, we get into servicing agreement and servicing the land and building permitting. So that's why, this is a very complex application process because it's outside of the growth management boundary, and it can take up to 8 years to go through before housing actually starts feeding the supply in Squamish on the land. So staff recommendation is three-part. For one, we need to do some administrative resolutions for engagement on the project. And finally, it is that we don't proceed with an OCP amendment at this time. There's still room in the growth management boundary to accommodate growth, and we still need to finish the list of policies that we're working on or will be working on next year. Thank you.
Council, questions? We've got Councillor Pettengill and Councillor Herford here, and then I'll go to Councillor Stoner.
Yes, thank you. First question, when you're talking about parcels inside the growth management boundary that are already zoned, you said Loggers East isn't fully zoned yet. North Crumpet, that's going through sub-area planning. Is that something you're considering zoning, or is that sort of excluded? It seems to me that's a large parcel that still is developable. I'm just wondering if you can speak to how that fits into our growth potential within the boundary.
Thank you. That's a great question. I forgot to mention that. So yes, we did not look at large parcels that need neighborhood planning, that don't have neighborhood planning yet, because that's going to be, there's a longer timeline associated with those lands as well. There's the Crumpet, the North Crumpet lands. There's the Thunderbird Creek lands in the Highlands. We didn't consider the potential density in University either, because there hasn't been a lot of movement on those lands, so the timeline is unknown. And these are projects that we have high confidence in going ahead, essentially.
So a second question: there's a couple of future residential parcels outside the growth management boundary. If we were to sort of accelerate and go ahead with this one sooner than the OCP says, would that set a precedent for the others, or would that make it harder for them to go forward as well at the same time if this one went forward? Like, how would you balance sort of the need for supply or accommodating the supply while not sort of picking favorites in terms of what's outside the boundary and what goes ahead?
Thank you. That's a good question. I think that it's hard to say at this point whether it'd be precedent setting or not. It would be up to council to decide whether to expand in one area only or whether there was merits to expand in both at that time. But it is anticipated that either or would be driven by an application from the landowner.
Councillor Herford.
Thank you. In the OCP, the section 9.2, we spent a lot of time in 9.2, but in I, which I think you sort of mentioned in the growth, projected growth to inventory that's coming, which is sort of what we're talking about there. But I starts off with, once substantial completion of residential infill has occurred, consider the following prior to initiating future residential neighborhood sub-area planning. So I'm curious what substantial completion of residential infill looks like. Like, what is that threshold, and how, if specific target isn't there, how do we handle that, or how does staff consider that particular recommendation?
Thank you. I believe there is another policy that actually talks to what is substantial completion, and I think it's 75% of the available lands have been filled in.
And do we have an idea of the natural flow of that is? Do we have an idea of where we stand currently in that regard?
Well, I think that we're not there yet, just because we know that, you know, we have these major development sites around downtown, Waterfront Landing, Oceanfront, downtown itself, and then all these other sites that, you know, really it's Waterfront Landing that has started on it, but the rest of these sites are still ramping up. So we haven't done the specific analysis of what percentage we're at, but we know we're not there yet.
Thank you. And then in section J says, consider major changes to the growth management boundary only as the outcome of either a comprehensive review and update of the OCP, and then ongoing joint planning with First Nations as described in 9.2, sub-area planning specifically for Chikai Fan is section 3. Section 4 is a comprehensive public engagement process that clearly identifies the rationale, benefits, and consequences of the proposed change and involves meaningful community review to ensure the public concerns and aspirations are consistently understood and addressed. And to me, that says that we're looking at the project on its merits prior to moving the boundary, not moving the boundary and looking at its merits in the sub-area planning process. And I can't quite align those two, or that the process is there. So could you provide some clarity on what the intent is with that particular piece and how that's incorporated into the recommendation today?
Absolutely. Thank you. That's a great question. I think that we are going to have to consider the merits of the project at every step until it's gone through the rezoning process. And I think at the growth management boundary level, it's going to be very high level analysis before we get into neighborhood planning, which is going to be much more detailed, and rezoning the same. So I do think that it applies to the growth management boundary question as well. But the principal question for the recommendation tonight is whether we are ready to review this application from a policy perspective. And we're not there yet.
So on that point, so then if this was to receive, let's do some hypotheticals. If this was to receive first reading this evening, then that section J4, which is the comprehensive public engagement piece, where does that happen? Once this is started, where does the public weigh in on that, which is what this policy calls out?
It would essentially start now. If council said, yes, we are ready to start the process, then that policy would certainly be part of the next steps.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you through the chair. Thank you, staff, for the presentation and for providing some context on steps with respect in particular to policy 9.2G. I guess I'm just curious from in terms of like advancing the work that's identified in 9.2G, it's like there's a number of things: increased operations and maintenance costs associated with servicing, impact to wildlife, air, aquatic, terrestrial systems. There's a lot of work in all of those pieces. And I'm curious who takes on that work if this were to move forward. And given that we have policies that are outstanding as a result of limited staff capacity, do we actually feel like we would have the staff capacity to move this forward at this time?
Thank you. No, we wouldn't have the staff capacity to move it forward at this time. And we would have to allocate, if the process started now, we'd probably have to allocate 1.5 person to this application. And then we'd have to talk to the applicants about resourcing or capacity funding. So yeah, we wouldn't have capacity at this point, and we'd have to plan for it essentially.
And just to clarify, does that work get done by us and our staff with capacity funding from the developer, or does the developer do that work themselves?
Through you, Mayor, I expect that there would be a joint process. So a lot of any technical work would have to be done by the proponent, and staff would be reviewing it and kind of guiding the production of work.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions from council at this time? Ms. Arthur's just a process question. The first two that statements, do they need to be approved separately versus the third?
That's how they've been laid out by Mr. Belaniskis in his report. So I would be prudent to do them for sure before considering the other one.
All right, seeing no other questions for staff, I'll move the first two that statements. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any comments on these? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Is there anyone opposed? Councillor French and Anderson opposed. Motion carries. Then just staff are recommending defeat of first reading, but we still have to put first reading as the motion forward. And then council, should you wish to, you would vote to defeat it. We wouldn't put the motion to defeat on the floor. If that makes sense. Councillor French.
Yep, I will move this recommendation from staff that the District of Squamish Official Community Plan Bylaw number 2500, 2017 Amendment Bylaw DL 509-510, 2022, number 2905, 2022 be given first reading, and I'll speak to it.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Pettengill. Councillor French, go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. I've supported moving District Lot 509-510 inside the growth management boundary previously, and that support continues. This is a property that's above the floodplain, a property that has been logged a few times, a property that offers an opportunity to build another needed roadway linking the Garibaldi Highlands to the Garibaldi Estates. And moving it inside the growth management boundary will allow us to start planning for smart construction once we have inevitably significantly filled in the developable land inside our current growth management boundary. So it's interesting to me that we don't yet have a brand asset inventory identifying the specific recreational and connectivity value. And I'll point out here that SORCA has indicated they're very close to having that ready for presentation. And we don't have a steep slopes development permit area amendment yet. And these missing items are keeping DL 509-510 outside the growth management area. These issues aren't holding back development at the end of Finch Drive or the east end of Valley Cliff, two areas with very similar physical conditions and topography to what we have at DL 509-510. It's been suggested it'll be 8 years from the point that this property comes inside the growth management boundary to the first housing unit being ready for occupation. And I think this is a very optimistic prediction. Realistically, probably looking at 10 years or more. And this means we'd be a decade away from having another large school property ready for development, more than a decade away from a connector road that we need now, and more than a decade away from having dedicated parking and facilities for the thousands of mountain bike riders who flock to the end of Perth Drive every year. We've heard that we have sufficient additional housing for the next decade. Well, this timing, in my mind, lines up quite well. This property offers an opportunity to have this landowner create purpose-built rental units, daycare spaces, and neighborhood parks. I support bringing this property inside the growth management boundary. Thank you.
Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, I'm not going to support this at this time. Well, I'll see what my colleagues say if they can change my mind. But when I look at what we have ahead of us in terms of work and all the timelines together and what is available within the growth management boundary and what the OCP says about how we will develop I don't think we're there yet in doing this. I sort of recall earlier today, I put forward a motion on a noise bylaw. I didn't get council support to move forward with that. And one of the common themes was that in general, it's a good idea, but we've got too much on our plate and there's other more pressing things we need to work with first. And I feel sort of sorry that I lost that vote, but I think that maybe same principle applies here, where we have a lot of housing that's further along in our growth management boundary. There's still a lot of work to do, but we're further along on that and we need to focus on that and get that online. The timelines are such that the OCP lays out how this comes online at the appropriate time. And so I still think the OCP makes sense. And so that's why I'm going to defeat this. Thank you.
All right, I've got Councillor Anderson, then Councillor Herford, Councillor Stoner, and I'm assuming Councillor Race, you want to be added to that list.
Thank you. Yes, in speaking in favor of Councillor French's motion, there is in the staff report a list of neighborhoods and developments as context for growth and where we're at and measuring population where we're at. We have touched on, through Councillor Stoner, has raised the issue of 9G, and this is in the OCP, and this concerns economic, environmental, social, and economic impacts. If we were to take those neighborhoods and developments that are underway or in play and put together a ledger and discuss 9G, we have Oceanfront, Waterfront Landing, Scott Crescent, Downtown, Ross Road, Loggers Lane East, Centennial Way. And the reason why I'm listing all of them is that none of them do not, or all of them have some issues with respect to 9G. It is loss of employment lands on a large scale. We've lost tourist, commercial, and industrial lands. We have parking and transportation issues that come up with some of these. We have habitat loss, deer winter range at Loggers Lane East, the northerly part of it. We did not get affordable housing at all with one of these large-scale developments. And so in looking at that ledger, if we were to put that together, I think that we are treating Lot 509 and 510 unfairly. I'm not convinced that this is an inappropriate place for residential development. It has been looked at this since 1958, when Marilyn Ring made plans to sell those lands. And Garibaldi Highlands and Valley Cliff were part of that thinking. I would not have included it outside of the growth management boundary. We have seen bias in other areas. There was, well, I'll just back up here. The Maryland Ring logging in mid-1990s created controversy around Lot 509, 510, which found its way into policy. It was affected by the politics of the day around logging practices. And there's been some carryover in the status of Lot 509, 510. In the 2006, the district hired a journalist to extol the virtues of downtown brownfield development. Scott Crescent, Waterfront Landing, and Oceanfront all featured at district expense in large-scale articles featured in the Vancouver Sun. We have not been without bias over the years, over the last couple of decades, in where we should build. And I think that there is, as part of a policy perspective, there must be a fairness perspective. But in the end, for me, it is a land use planning decision. And I think that this is, we must be building on the hillsides. We have far too much competition for lands and their values, habitat, employment, infrastructure on our valley bottoms. So there's that high level principle of where we should be building for residential growth. And we often, when we talk about growth, we only think about residential, it seems, and we miss that bigger context of habitat, transportation infrastructure, and jobs. So I just cannot support excluding these properties on that high level kind of philosophical plane. Thank you.
Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I'm speaking in support of the motion, but keeping in mind that what we're discussing here is moving the growth management boundary. But the vote we're about to undertake is first reading of considering moving the growth management boundary. And I'm looking to trigger a comprehensive public engagement process that can hopefully give the optimist in me says that that'll give the developer an opportunity to wow us with exceeding all of our important policies and bringing forward a world-class development. It could also be that that's not the case once this comprehensive public engagement process is underway that can show the benefits and potential consequences of the proposed change. So I'm looking forward to having more of a community discussion about it so that the facts can come forward about what is proposed and what the challenges are going to be. I don't support or anything that we do at first reading all the way through at the first consideration. So I'm looking for more information and to start doing some work so we can understand what those trade-offs are and what the project really entails rather than leaning on the missing pieces of policy. The policy pieces, I agree, are important, and that's why they were highlighted. I do think we've heard just today that we're weeks away from one of them, and the other, that being the the asset piece, and the steep slope is on the docket upcoming next year. But as this project, I don't think those policies start impacting the planning of this project for a number of years. So I think that time frame could be reasonable. And in moving first reading, this can get the planning process can move along, and the public engagement can start, and the public can weigh in. That doesn't mean that this is, and it will be another, most likely a different configuration of council that considers second reading, and whether it's defeated or succeeds at that time, I think depends entirely on the quality of the work up to that point. So I'll support at this time so we can have a deeper conversation with the community and start providing some certainty to the community as well as the developer as what's going to happen on this important piece of land in our community. Thank you.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to highlight that we are considering first reading of an OCP amendment, and I'm a little bit concerned that some of my colleagues seem to have made up their mind that this land should already be within the growth management boundary. We're at first reading of whether that should happen or not. So I was just a little bit surprised by some of my colleagues' comments. I personally don't know whether this land should be in or outside of the growth management boundary, and there are lots of things that need to be weighed in order to make that decision, and lots of information and research that needs to be completed in order to inform that decision and inform the discussion that our community should have and when we're making that important decision. But I think back and I went back and re-listened to the presentation that we got on this topic a year ago in March 2021. And I don't think that much has changed between now and then with regards to where we're at with the growth management boundary and the policies in the OCP, in particular 9.2H, which outlines the number of policy pieces that need to be completed on our end before we consider an amendment to the OCP, or sorry, an OSP amendment for the growth management boundary. There are some things that have changed. Last year, I highlighted a few key policies that I really wanted to see completed, which include the wildfire DPA, the missing middle work, and our advancement of the Affordable Housing Society, which have been completed. So we are doing the work on our end. As my fellow councillors have mentioned, the brand asset inventory is very close to being completed. And I think the one outstanding policy is steep slopes. And I hesitate whether it's worth holding up this work in order to complete that. But as I heard from staff this evening, there's a staff capacity issue. And I think it's important that we get that policy piece completed because it's actually going to inform how much of that land is available and developable. And so it's not fulsome to have a conversation with our community at this point and initiate those discussions without that steep slopes work completed. So for me, that is an important piece to move forward. I highlighted it last year, and it's not complete at this point. And so I don't think that the policy components in the OCP have been met to such a threshold that we can support giving first reading at this time. So I'll be voting against the motion on the floor. Thank you.
Councillor Race.
Thank you. One of the common concerns that I hear in the community and have for several years now is the concerns around growth. The rate of growth, growth period, all the construction and all the related issues with growth. And so last term rather, when we were going through the OCP review, and staff came up with this concept of the growth management boundary, I embraced that concept because I know we can't stop growth, notwithstanding what some people would like to do. That's not realistic. We are going to grow, but what we can do is manage growth. And I think our community expects that from us. And so I looked at the growth management boundary as I thought at the time, a brilliant way of managing growth. It focused growth to, in some cases, already settled or brownfield areas, focused growth to areas that had already been committed for development and had zoning in place or some zoning in place, and it excluded areas that had not crossed that threshold, at least for the time being. And so when I look at this, granted, there are some policy pieces that aren't quite in place, and we spent quite a lot of time around those at the time of the OCP adoption. But for me, the fundamental issue is whether we need to grow with this property. This is a huge property. It's not a small add-on here or add-on there. It is a huge property and it brings huge growth issues with it. And so I'm not prepared to consider amending the growth management boundary until we are in a position where we actually need to grow. And we don't need to grow, as staff have pointed out. We have sufficient capacity within the growth management boundary. We can focus on, it's closer to services, closer to utilities and so forth. And we don't need to expand out into, granted, it's been logged before, but it's growing back nicely. It is certainly greenfield. And I don't think we need to go there, and maybe not for another decade. And we'll see whether the growth continues at the rate we're going through. If it increases, it's the kind of thing we can reconsider at any time. So I will be voting against this resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Race. I too will be voting against the resolution on the floor. I think staff have made their case that we're not there from a policy position yet. There's clearly sufficient room within the current land base, at least for the next decade, if not beyond. I think there is, so to me, there's just simply no rush. I think we need time for our affordable housing policy to mature. I still think we're missing buy locals focus. I think that we should still be added to the empty homes and speculation tax, should the province ever feel so inclined. I think we haven't even begun to see the missing middle housing that we've been working towards. And I think it's important for us to see how that takes shape within the current land base before we understand how it fits into future residential neighborhoods. I think we obviously got behind on forming our housing society. It's now in place, but one of the goals that we wanted to achieve in this term was a pathway to affordable home ownership. And we haven't seen that, and we need to give the housing society time to figure that out and how we get residents there. So it's simply not just the OCP policies that we want to make sure we understand. but also our climate policies and how they're shaping up. I heard one of my colleagues say we need parking for the thousands of people that are mountain biking. No, we actually need to rethink how people arrive in our community, how they participate in the activities here in order to mitigate climate change. The way we organize and plan for and move people around in the cities that will be net zero and must be in the future are not the neighborhoods that we are planning for today. And we should give ourselves time to understand what these need to look like before we start to sprawl even more than we already do. I too was surprised by some of my colleagues' statements that they've already seemed to have made up their mind that we need to do growth management at this very early stage. That was surprising. And finally, that brand asset management isn't just about the trails on lot 509, 510. The brand asset management was to cover all of our activities in the district, not just mountain biking. This was about protecting the brand, Hardwired for Adventure, and the many activities that people pursue in this corridor. So I don't think it's right to just limit it to something being completed on 509, 510 and calling that a day. So for me, this isn't ready for consideration. We certainly have lots of work to do. I'd rather see our natural asset management plan further along. And we still need to catch up within our current boundaries around transit, infrastructure. And there's room within this land base to build more schools, more fire halls, what have you. So it's not time to sprawl. It's time to keep doing the good work to prepare this community for the future. Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Councillor Race, Councillor Stoner, Councillor Pettengill, Mayor Elliott, opposed, motion fails. Thank you, staff. Council, would you like a 5-minute break before we move on to the patio program? Yes? All right, 5 minutes. Thanks, Harley. I wasn't paying attention to the guy who was giving me the thumbs up. All right, we're back and we're on item 8. B1. So this is the District of Squamish amendment bylaw for the patio program. And I will turn it over to Ms. Hamilton.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Carrie Hamilton. I'm a planner with Community Planning. And with me today is Nav Gill. She's virtual from the Real Estate Department. This evening, we are presenting the results of the patio public survey, the new patio program, and its proposed bylaw readings, along with some additional housekeeping bylaw amendments. So prior to 2020, the district supported patio use through the sidewalk patio program. This included any patio on district land, and if your patio was on private land, you would have to go through the regular delegated development permit process. When COVID hit in 2020, like many other cities, the district acted quickly to create a temporary patio program so that businesses could expand their business outdoor area quickly to comply with health regulations. Through this process, we had over 20 patios use the temporary program, both in 2020 and 2021, and some to expand their existing patios and others to create them for the first time. The program was extended to June 2022 and October 2021 to give patio owners and district staff time to help convert the temporary patio program into a new patio program, one that streamlined the application and review process for businesses and internal staff. So shortly after the October 2021 meeting, staff created a new application form where we have received to date 14 applications that express interest in keeping their patio area. Staff also engaged with businesses and the community through a survey that launched in February 2022 to learn more about how the new patio program can serve the community and business better. The district used the Let's Talk Squamish platform to launch 2 surveys in early February 2022 to ask specific questions around patio use, interests and concerns in the general community, and a separate survey to ask specific questions to both patio and non-patio businesses who may benefit or not benefit from patio use. We had 151 responses to the community survey and 20 responses to the business survey. Generally, there was a significant support amongst respondents for patios, with only 3 responses stating they did not generally support patios. Private and sidewalk patios were the most supportable, with 93 to 94% support, and curbside patios having the least support at 77%. Key reasons why the community supports patios are because they enjoy opportunities for socializing, eating, and drinking outdoors. They support our local business by giving them room to grow and have helped with COVID economic business recovery. They enjoy that patios provide more outdoor seating opportunities and adds activation and vibrancy to our streets, neighborhoods, and public spaces. Although only a few did not support patios of some forms of patios, reasons they did not support patios were generally focused around the lack of parking for existing restaurant cafe businesses to begin with, or the lack of parking generally in areas where patios have been supported. Other common concerns were that some patio designs were unsafe or needed more consideration for sidewalk width or accessibility needs. Some curbside and private patio designs also had concerns around making driving and parking more difficult. Other survey questions were the seasonality use of patios. Staff were surprised to see over 53% of respondents want to use patios all season long, with 36% open to using them only on the sunny days or if there's heaters or covered spaces. Only 14% wanted to see these patio spaces converted back to parking in the winter season, and only a small 4% of respondents said they won't be interested in winter patios at all. As a result, the district's new patio program is proposing to support patio use all season long, as long as the patios remain activated and used throughout the winter season. In some cases, this will still be a case-by-case basis, as some landowners, businesses, or locations just won't support winter use. We also use the survey as an opportunity to ask the community their opinions on other uses of public land, such as using some parking stalls for the use of mobile food or commercial vendors, and public seating areas like what was recently created in the Winnipeg Street in downtown Squamish. The community survey generally responded positively to these uses, with 23% wanting limits to how many spaces we offered and 10% not supportive. This information doesn't necessarily affect patio use specifically, but can be helpful information when considering how public land is used downtown and to highlight interest in seeing more activation and seating in our downtown streets. Curbside patios, formerly known as the parking stall patios, were the least supported patio form in the community survey, despite 78% of respondents still supporting them. Most of the concerns were parking related. Given the significant survey support for patios in Squamish and the interest in creating outdoor social and vibrant spaces, although these parking concerns are valid, they may be better addressed with other methods related to parking signage, meters, more parking locations, more active transportation, or development regulation changes, instead of limiting the use of patios in downtown parking stalls. That said, staff did include in the application review process several design changes that can be made to make these patios designed safer and make remaining parking stalls easier to use through design changes. The business survey was specifically targeted to existing patio businesses and business owners who operate adjacent to or near a patio. Generally, we receive feedback on the application process and how it can be improved, with most business respondents open to reasonable fee structure. There was generally a mixed desire for year-round winter use of patios. And with the main reasons business owners supported patios was for its added animation and vibrancy to the street, storefront, and help draw customers to their area. The main concerns of patios was the loss of parking it may create for their customers. So as a result of the business survey, several changes were made to the new patio program application form to help streamline the process for businesses. The new application form has one form and one process for all businesses, regardless of whether the patio is located on district or private land. It provides all the information needed for for our internal departments to review. It provides businesses with design guidelines and resource links to follow, and provides guidance as to when an architect drawing is and is not needed. In addition, staff have created an internal review process through the Tempest program as part of our regular business licensing process to also help streamline the review process of these applications internally. The application includes a section for both district and private land patios, providing written design guidelines and helpful visuals. The design and guidelines took into consideration the community's feedback, such as widening minimum sidewalk widths and ensuring that patios or new sidewalk areas are designed to be accessibly friendly. They also provide more specific guidelines on where curbside patios should be located and how they should be designed in order to address some of the parking concerns that were received. So in order to create a new patio program, several bylaws need to be amended, and I shall pass it over to Navgil to run those bylaws through.
Thanks, Carrie. Next slide, please. So first up is the fees and charges bylaw. So right now, delegated development permits are required for private land patios, and the fee is $500 for that. Since 2013, there has been no fees for district land patios, as we have been trying to incentivize street patios and create animation. What we're proposing is on the right side of the column there. When we looked at other municipalities to see what the same size patio would approximately cost, it was around $100 to $1,900. So it was varied, and different municipalities use different methods to calculate it. As Carrie mentioned, 87% of businesses surveyed were supportive of an application fee and a balanced fee structure among district and private land patios. So what we are proposing is a one-time, less administrative application fee based on occupancy. So for those businesses under 30, the fee would be $175. For those over 30 in occupancy, the fee would be $300. This will help offset processing time to review applications, as well as, we just want to mention, this isn't meant to compensate for land use costs. The annual fee for district land patios is for staff time to review insurance every year and ensure compliance to license fees. For the traffic bylaw, currently there's a sidewalk cafe definition and it's referenced throughout the bylaw. What we're proposing is a new definition in line with the new patio program and replacement of the word sidewalk cafe to the new definition outdoor dining patio. Currently, district land patios need to be looked at and renewed every 3 years. However, staff are recommending this be increased to 5 years to align with the delegation bylaw. For the business license bylaw, there's currently no reference to sidewalk cafes or patios. So the amendments include a new definition for outdoor dining patio and a new section in the bylaw to address outdoor dining patio regulations pertinent to the business license bylaw. So the regulations outline the application and approval process for businesses and also reference the specific regulation in the noise and smoking bylaws that pertain to outdoor dining use. And as you can see, the new definition is on the bottom there. So another bylaw that needs amending is a land development procedure. Currently, a delegated development permit exemption for outdoor patios already exists in this bylaw. However, the clause references an old repealed sidewalk cafe bylaw, which was for district land patios. The amendment that's proposed is a minor change to the wording of the clause. So it keeps the DDP exemption for outdoor patios and ensures it accommodates both private and district land patios in the exemption. Next up, we have the zoning bylaw. So currently a patio parking exemption only applies to the business park. However, the exemption has been extended to address restaurant and downtown uses in the amendment, as well as including new definitions and Class B parking amendments to comply with new patio regulations. Next slide, please. Thanks. While we have these bylaws coming up for readings, we also want to include some other unrelated bylaw amendments, as it's easier to open up the bylaw one time rather than doing it over and over again. So Carrie, next slide. We will run through these quickly. So the business license bylaw, we're removing a food truck storage clause, as well as increasing the maximum size of food trucks. For the fees and charges bylaw, we're adding a wildfire DPA fee, updating temporary commercial vending fee, clarifying that annual license fees for food trucks and temporary commercial vendors are prorated, also a minor cemetery fee change and a DPA 1 fee change. Next slide. The zoning bylaw, we are adding portable food vending, alcohol beverage manufacturing, as well as new covered bike parking definition and other bike regulations. For the traffic bylaw, it did not have temporary commercial vending and portable food vending in the definition, so we're adding that, as well as that the CEO can execute these licenses. We also are including a clause that will allow district lease license holders to tow vehicles from their tenure areas, and that's an example of that is the farmers market. Next slide, Carrie. And oh, sorry, I turn it over to Carrie.
Yeah, so the patio program updates are designed to streamline processes, reduce permitting turnaround times, and generally reduce and equalize applications amongst permitting fees. So this creates new opportunities for businesses, which will help support economic recovery from COVID-19 and in turn support increasing the number of local jobs per capita, which is in line with one of our district priorities, which is the economy and local jobs. The other one this aligns with is the neighborhood connectivity in public spaces. Patios create vibrant and activated spaces and streetscapes while offering more space for social gatherings. The patio program updates will help to create equal opportunity amongst businesses to support patios both downtown, which we have more exemptions for, as well as these existing neighborhood nodes, which we'd like to see more patios in these neighborhoods. So our council's recommendations this evening are for amendments to the fees and charges bylaw, number 2907, and then the land development procedures bylaw, 2909, the business license amendment bylaw, 2908, and the traffic bylaw at 29110. And these would be given first 3 readings. The other recommendation is that the zoning bylaw, 2906, be given first and second reading, and that a public hearing for this amendment bylaw be scheduled for April 19th, 2022. And part of the rationale for having a quick turnaround with this is that we have done some of the public engagement already, as well as we do need to be reviewing these patios as this July deadline or the June deadline is coming up, and we do want to be ensuring that we can still offer consistent continual service. So alternatively, the alternative recommendation is if council has some concerns around these changes, that council consider a temporary patio program extension to October 31st so that we're not delaying, we're still allowing these patios to operate throughout the summer season, and then to propose those patio changes. I will note that this won't change that the liquor licensing currently is still set to expire in June. So it may mean that patios can operate in the district, but it may not mean that they can serve liquor in the district until we are able to approve them here. So this concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. Council, do you have questions? Go ahead, Councilor Herford.
Thank you. I noticed the change to the fees for this was sort of below 30 and above 30 to simplify, but how large do these things get? Is there, I'm assuming because there isn't a third tier of pricing that it's not necessary to have it, but or should there be a third tier, I guess is the question. Like, are we seeing these extended patios being up to 60 people or whatever the next bump would be?
Through you, Mayor, the pricing that we propose are really based on the application time and review time. So the under 30 actually relates to the building code, which the building code stipulates if you're over 30 occupancy, you require an architect, which typically just requires more review time and more professionals to review that. So that's how we kind of made that calculation. It wasn't really to charge them if you're a larger patio that way.
Thank you for that clarity. And then I was curious how this this policy interacts with sort of the new builds. It feels to me like sort of a retrofitting of existing built space. And as we have new built space coming online, how this interacts with that, given that we're often talking about buying the way out of, say, parking requirements, and we're pushing for wider sidewalk, wider sidewalks for public realm space. And although this activates it, I'm just curious how that was taken into consideration, or those types of things were taken into consideration while this was being developed.
Yeah, so through the mayor, definitely a lot of these regulations are designed to help and support existing developments where we've seen parking use or parking that's in front of these restaurant or in front of the buildings, which is an older style of design. Typically, our development permits actually support parking in the rear or parking in garages now. So in our new developments, we likely won't see exemptions to those parking areas for the new developments because one will be supporting to consider those patio uses if they want to put in a restaurant at development permit, but also that we aren't really supporting surface parking in a lot of these areas that typically would be front and center off of the street that we mostly see now buildings facing that instead.
Other questions? Councilor Pettengill?
Yeah, a couple. You mentioned there's some more clarity about when engineer stamps or architect stamps are required. We saw in some of the correspondence or comments, people weren't clear why they needed a stamp. Do we know, have our changes, the people who raised concerns and said, I shouldn't need one or I don't want one, would those particular individuals still need one? Has that changed in terms of when I'm just wondering if you can speak to how often will people need a stamp?
Yeah, through you, Mayor. So the BC building code is something we can't amend, and this is the stipulation where anything over 30, the requirement for our building inspectors to approve this would be that a professional architect stamp these drawings to ensure that proper exiting capacities are all met, as well as washroom capacities. It's more of a life safety component to that, and we can't overrule those. So unfortunately, for those patios who did write in to express concern around it, we can provide the rationale and have offered opportunities for any of the smaller patios that don't comply with that, but we can't make exemptions for those patios that currently have those concerns, if that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. And if I understand what's proposed right now, we will continue to permit year-round patios. And so I'm just wondering if we need, and maybe this is something that we come back to in October, but do we need expectations, or do we think we need expectations around activation in the winter, especially if they're on public property? And then related to that, I understand there may be some changes around the rules that impact our snow clearing obligations. And so have we thought through how wintertime patios might interact with those new obligations?
Yes, certainly. We've definitely discussed that, and I'll pass this over to Nav to maybe speak to that question.
Thanks, Carrie. And through the mayor. So we did trial out the patios this winter and just to see how things would be. And we had a pretty bad winter, and we checked in with ops, and they said that snow clearing was not an issue for them, like beside the patios. As well, in our agreements, we have clauses that the people that have patios are responsible for clearing them. So that will continue forward as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
One thing, if I may add, we did see that some of the patios over the winter program didn't get activated, and so one of the clauses in the agreement moving forward is that patios can remain for the winter, but they have to be activated and cleared and used. They can't just be there as like storage for the patio over the winter time.
Other questions? One of the questions I had, Ms. Hamilton, was about allowing the variation between the patio being right up against the building versus out on the edge of the curb. So not on the road, but at the edge there. And so I guess my first question is, does that variation add to the public realm, or does it make it difficult for us to design the public realm? Because people will now be potentially zigzagging between patios versus just having a streetscape to walk down.
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. And we have seen different designs. I mean, the temporary program has been a great time to explore different designs and what works, as well as referencing other cities and how these are done. Some of the challenges with restaurant use is that they have to comply with multiple different other regulations, such as liquor board, and having liquor cross a sidewalk, it ends up being challenging. for some of those regulations and to have that cross the public realm all the time. So sometimes there is more value in having those patios close up and having the sidewalk veer off and change its path. I think there's design considerations that we still have a liberty to make when we're reviewing these applications to look to see where this is most beneficial. Some of the times where it makes sense is when there's adjacent to curb bulges, where you're already kind of moving that traffic or the pedestrian movement is changing anyways and shifting to get closer to the intersection. We may not want to support if it's a small storefront and maybe one parking stall. In order to make that accessible, you would basically have to take 3 parking stalls to make one patio or sidewalk punch out around one storefront or one parking stall width. So it probably wouldn't be beneficial to do it there. So I think there's going to be some review in where those are most appropriate to support a design where a sidewalk is pushed out. And we wouldn't be supporting what we've seen in the temporary program, which has been ramps down to asphalt. We would want to see a flush surface and a full design of an extended sidewalk. We wouldn't want to see kind of these up and down movements that we supported through the temporary COVID times.
And did we ask disability advocates about this program specifically and look at the design? Because one of the things that's hard to navigate, even if you just got a stroller and a dog and a kid on a run bike, is maneuvering around things versus like go straight and don't go into the road. So right now, if you have a patio on the road, it has to be enclosed, so no one can escape out onto the road. But in the temporary program, sometimes you were asked to go down onto the asphalt. Obviously, you say now we're going to make that flush, but there wasn't a requirement to then make sure you couldn't go out onto the road. And I wonder, so have we looked at this from an accessibility standpoint and certainly that safety aspect of forcing the pedestrian off the sidewalk and into the roadway?
Yeah, I think there was, just as we've seen with construction sites, we were kind of making temporary sidewalks. We kind of took the same principles with the patios just to make it happen for COVID. I admit it definitely wasn't the best design, and there were some designs that were problematic for accessibility purposes. We've tried with these guidelines to ensure that there's a lot of width when it comes to those turning movements so that they aren't sharp 90-degree angles, and that they do feel still like a more meandering pathway and there's space for that. And we are doing work with the new accessibility committee in town through a totally different project, but we did do a street walkabout and we actually did talk about patios and brought that up as some of the concerns. And there is actually some new construction ramping that we've seen, and there's been a lot of support for the new designs of that. So I think there's, from what I've heard, a support for redesigning it as long as there's enough space and that there's appropriate ramps and protections in place. So I think our design application changes will hopefully address those, and we'll review them with each design and hopefully get better as we go.
We're also extending the license period, and given that development is occurring throughout downtown, what escape clause is built in case we have to change that license area, or if someone just is a bad operator and we continue to have problems? How do we make sure that we can get out from under that 5-year license term if we need to?
That's a NAV one.
Yeah, through the mayor. So yeah, we do have a termination clause in our agreements. So if the district needs the land for any purpose, we can take the land back. Also, if they're not abiding by the terms and conditions, then they have a default period. If they don't fix that, then we can terminate. So we do have protection built in there if there's any issues with these patios.
Thank you. Council, any other questions? All right, I'm not seeing any, so we have to deal with these all separately. So the first motion on the floor is that the zoning bylaw amendment for the patio program be given first 2 readings, and that a public hearing be set for April 19th. It's moved by Councillor Herford, second by Councillor Race. Any comments? Councillor Stoner?
Thank you. I'll just make my comments. Now, I look forward to hearing from the community on a public hearing for this matter. I appreciate the engagement that's already been done through the survey and the feedback that we've gotten from both the business owners as well as the broader community and citizens. I think it is exciting to think about how we advance this patio program and streamline our policies and bylaws in order to enable that. But looking forward to hearing any feedback from the public on April 19th.
Thank you. Any other comments? I would say at this point, I'm not totally sold on having all of these different options in terms of design. So against the building, out at the edge of the curb, and in the parking stall. I'm also didn't see any limits on how many parking stalls we would allow to take up in a single block area. So what is the balance between providing access and also the patios, which I do think add to the public realm. But we've got, streetscape standards being designed. We have new development going on, and I'd rather see consistency of where these patios are placed versus kind of a mishmash, but open to hearing from the public and seeing that from a different perspective, if that's the case. Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. So then first three readings for the fees and charges bylaw related to the patio program. This is bylaw 2907, 2022. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. Then the Squamish Land Development Procedures bylaw amendment for the patio program number 2909, 2022 be given first three readings. Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any opposed? Motion carries. That the Squamish Business License bylaw for the patio program number 2908, 2022 be given first three readings. Moved by Councillor French. I'll second that. Any opposed? Motion carries. And then the District of Squamish Traffic Bylaw Amendment Bylaw for the patio program number 2910, 2022 be given first three readings. By Councillor Pettengill, second by Councillor Herford. Any opposed? Motion carries. And that's it on the patio program. Correct? No, that was part of the first one. All right, thank you, Ms. Hamilton. Thank you, Ms. Gill.
Thank you.
I have noticed our finance staff entered the room before we contemplate the first three readings of the financial plan amendment bylaw. Was there a presentation? I wasn't expecting one, but. Did you have something prepared? All right, come forward and we'll keep it short and sweet. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. My name is Roland Russell. I'm Senior Financial Analyst for Planning and Budgeting for the District of Squamish. Joining me on my outside, can't get my lefts and rights going, is Heather Boxrud, the Chief Financial Officer of the district. We are here today to present for 3 readings. Bylaw 2905, which is an amendment bylaw to the 2022 financial plan, 22 through 26 financial plan. When we last met, we had the tax impact of the amendment was $32,000. Council requested that we add to that an additional $68,000 for the transfer by transferring the savings from completed special projects in 2021. So we have made that adjustment, and now the total reduction is $100,000 from the original amount in the original bylaw. So there's a process that we follow with respect to budget amendment process. This is the budget amendment process. Sorry, I get that right. I'm not going to go through all the points. Probably the most important one is the first one, that if items are not included in the financial plan, then we're not supposed to spend the money. So there are reasons why we make these changes, and they're listed there, and they were shared with council and public at a previous engagement. Included in the financial plan amendment are carry forward projects. So in the capital carry forward, we have approximately $30 million total projects being added, and then there's some timing adjustments of other projects. So overall increase the capital budget of $26 million. Of that, only $46,000 is tax funded from 2021. With respect to the special operating projects, there is a larger amount that is being carried forward. Carry forward here is approximately $1.3 million. And of that value, $190,000 is tax funded from the 2021 tax year. And lastly, we have some COVID projects which are continuing into 2022. And in this list of projects, council has requested staff to add the last item, which is a COVID contingency for $182,000. And by doing so, this would allocate all of the $3.76 million that the BC government have provided will now have been allocated over the 3 years of 2020, 21, and 2022. So it is our intent, if at all possible, to wrap up this program this year. And God willing, perhaps COVID will stop this year too. And that is it for our presentation. There is a resolution in front of council, and we are open to questions and discussion at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Russell. Council, any questions on the financial plan amendment? Look how clear and concise and to the point you were, Mr. Russell. There's no questions. Oh, no, wait. Councilor Herford is moving first 3 readings. Is our seconder? Seconded by Councilor Pettengill. Any comments? Councilor Herford.
Thank you. Thank you to staff for all the work on the budget process. I was happy to see we were able to get the budget over the line earlier than ever, and as our first go at the amendment in sort of Q1 amendment. I think it went very well and allowed us to make the needed adjustments. So I'm very happy with where we landed, and thank you for all your hard work on this. Thank you.
Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor. So speaking in favor of the motion, I will just single in on one of the line items in front of us. The one that puts $68,000 into tax refund. I love the work that staff did to work with council to create that and just give a little bit back to our tax burdened residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank goodness I was able to put that motion forward and appreciate council's support in putting that forward for consideration to bring those savings to our community. Happy to support this. I'm so pleased at the way this has rolled out. It was a first for all of us, and glad we can make some minor adjustments without redoing the whole budget process, which was not the intent of finishing by the year end and then doing the amendments to manage the carry forwards. So appreciate how smoothly this has gone and look forward to our tax rate discussion in a few weeks. It's a few weeks away, isn't it? I think so. All right. Thanks very much. Any other comments? Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, so we're on to 8D. This is items for adoption this evening. First up, the District of Squamish Official Community Plan bylaw for the Oceanfront Amendments number 2796, 2020 be adopted. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up, District of Squamish zoning bylaw for the Oceanfront Housekeeping Amendments number 2797, 2020 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor French. Any opposed? Motion carries. And the District of Squamish Phase Development Agreement bylaw, amendment bylaw number 2812, 2021 be adopted. Councillor Pettengill, you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question for staff around, since we first saw this bylaw, Fortis is working on a program through the BCUC asking for permission to sort of spare the details, but essentially claim the gas they're selling now is 100% renewable for new customers. And I'm worried that this will allow them to escape the intent of the bylaw we've written. So I'm looking for staff if there's a clarifying amendment we can add, or if we have certainty that
This is all new information post public hearing. So depending on the disposition of tonight's vote, then you could ask for something else. But what you're stating right now is new information, and it can't, there's no amendment at adoption.
so what would be my option then?
Be to bring something forward or make your statement or vote or something like that. But right now we're at the adoption and it's post public hearing. It's post third. Third is when you can make an amendment that is non-substantive or based on what you heard at the public hearing that doesn't increase density or change the use. Those are the only options around even with a phase development agreement, because it's part of the zoning.
So can we just deal with the motion on the floor then before we address Councillor Pettengill's? Or can we put the motion on the floor and address your questions afterwards? About how you can vote whichever way you want, but we can't add new information to this at this point, and we can't amend it at this point.
Gary knows how it can be done.
So can we finish on this and then you can ask your question? There's no way for you to do this at this point in this bylaw.
Okay, my understanding is I could amend as long as it didn't change density.
That was at third reading. You can amend at adoption. So I want to put this motion on the floor, pass it, and then you can raise your hand. Okay. It's moved by Councilor Ray, second by Councilor Stoner. This is for bylaw 2812, 2021 be adopted. Any opposed? Motion carries. Councilor Pettengill, if you'd like to ask staff your question.
Yeah, so I guess I'm wondering how we address what I see as an attempt by Fortis to essentially circumvent these sorts of regulations across the province.
Yes, so through the chair, I discourage you from trying to pursue this in a bylaw. The way that we're dealing with it right now is we're negotiating the no gas covenants, what we call the no gas covenants at rezoning as part of a negotiated land development agreement. The definition of natural gas in that instrument would be the place to address this issue. So what I can do is I can talk to Mr. Velaniskis about that boilerplate document and making sure that that issue is covered off in that instrument. But I would recommend against trying to do this in a bylaw. You can't really tell people they can't use legally available fuels in a bylaw, but we can negotiate it through a land development agreement and a restrictive covenant. That's the place to do it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I don't care how we address it, just that it gets addressed. So whatever the best way to address it is fine.
Understood.
Would you like a motion to that effect so that it is on the books and actioned?
Yes, that would be fantastic. So I guess a direct staff to find a way to address possible loopholes in our definition of renewable energy in buildings.
And specifically our no gas covenant?
I would prefer to give staff the flexibility to come back with whatever the best mechanism is.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councilor Herford. Any further comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Under 9A, financial services, we have to appoint our deputy finance officer. We just need to make some corrections in the motion, council. So it should read that council appoint Rianne Souza, director of financial operations, as deputy finance officer. So eliminating the word chief for the district of Squamish. So changing services to operations and removing the word chief. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councilor Race. Councilor Race.
Actually, I had a question, and I was just curious whether this is a legislative position or whether this is our internal structure.
It is legislative, and I'll get Ms. Arthurs to address it.
That's all I needed to know. It was just a matter of curiosity. So I'll second it.
All right, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Under 9B, we have a Union of BC Municipalities Community Emergency Preparedness Fund grant applications. This would be for the 2022 Emergency Support Services and the Emergency Operations Center grants. And Ms. Latimer is here to give a brief presentation and answer any questions. Go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll just do a quick sound check that you can hear me all right.
Yes, we can.
That's fantastic. So staff are here tonight to seek support to submit an application to implement projects under the 2022 Emergency Support Services, or ESS, and Emergency Operations Center, EOC grants. These fall under the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, which is administered by UBCM. Staff will also briefly outline the proposed use of the funds. So just for background, these grants are offered each year. And over the past few years, the District of Squamish has received funds through these grants to successfully implement a number of different projects. The ESS and EOC grants do contribute 100% of costs for eligible activities to a maximum of $25,000 for each project. So some of the past projects that the District of Squamish Emergency Program has implemented include planning and training for mass evacuations in partnership with the Squamish Nation, procuring technology to allow for the digital registration of evacuees, and more recently, we have procured a shipping container that will act as a disaster supply cache and house emergency response supplies for first responders, and that actually arrives in Squamish this week. For the 2022 ESS grant, staff are proposing to use funds towards increasing the understanding and awareness of how to better deliver services that meet the functional needs of evacuees. Equipment and supplies that would be procured under this project will allow emergency support services personnel to ensure that there's appropriate access to all areas of reception centers where evacuees might show up in an emergency, as well as group lodging or accommodation facilities, including for people with mobility, visual, communication, and other functional needs. The proposed project would also help emergency support services staff and volunteers assist people who've had to evacuate from their homes without their supports. So including having items on hand based on the Disability Alliance of BC's publication, extra items to have for emergency support services as recommended, also as recommended by local disability advocates. For the other grant application for the Emergency Operations Center 2022 application, staff are proposing to use the funds to procure laptops for Emergency Operations Center personnel and to purchase equipment to improve the district's emergency radio communications infrastructure. The majority of the radio equipment that is at the current Emergency Operations Center is considered legacy, and it will be considerably more cost effective to purchase new equipment to install in the new EOC at the Valley Cliff Fire Hall rather than uninstall, move, and reinstall the old equipment. Staff have worked with consultants, with the all-volunteer Squamish Amateur Emergency Radio Team, as well as with Emergency Management BC to provide input and identify the minimum operating requirements and equipment needs that would be procured under this project. So with that, staff would like to request that Council consider approving the following resolution, that the District of Squamish submit 2 applications to the Union of British Columbia Municipalities for the 2022 Emergency Support Services and Emergency Operations Center grants under the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund.
Thank you, Ms. Latimer. Council, any questions? Councilor French?
Thanks, Mayor. Maybe a little bit in the weeds, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is the plan to use some of the grant funding to buy the various items that are listed as extra items for emergency social services to have on hand? So like I'm thinking specifically of walkers, crutches, canes, wheelchair. Yeah, so that's my first question.
Through the mayor, that's correct. We would be looking to procure some of these items to have on hand. We would be looking to store them in our typical reception center locations like Brennan Park Recreation Center, or working in partnership with Squamish Nation to store some at Totem Hall.
Okay, second question's answered. Thank you.
Anything else? Councilor Stoner?
I'm going to move the recommendation.
Moved by Councilor Stoner, seconded by Councilor Herford. Any comments? Go ahead, Councilor Stoner.
Just very briefly, thanks, Ms. Latimer, for bringing this forward and for mentioning that the CCAN is coming. I was going to ask about the status of that project. So it's exciting to hear that it's coming to our community, and I look forward to seeing that project in action. I continue to be amazed by the creativity of the projects that get moved forward through this grant application process. I think it really does help keep our emergency response management team and program kind of at the leading edge. And I think this year's project in terms of making sure that our services are as accessible as possible is one example of that. So thank you for your continued work, and I'm happy to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner. Anybody else? Councillor Herford?
Thank you. I'll be supporting the motion. I think the year we just came through, we were, for the most part, able to duck, dodge, and weave our way through as disasters happened around us, and for the most part. And but it's really nice to know that when that does come for us, that we are prepared, and all the hard work that you do and throughout the year, not just of these applications, is gives me confidence that we're going to be okay. And every time that these come forward with these grant applications and the projects just make us more and more prepared, and we can never be too prepared. So thank you so much for your work, and I'm happy to support.
All right, seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Latimer. Great ideas.
Thank you very much.
Council, we're on item 10, our consent agenda. So anything in which you find yourself in conflict of interest or any correspondence that you wish to pull, now is the time to do it. I'm not seeing any hands, so I'll move the consent agenda. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor French. Any opposed? Motion carries. We had no late items today. So under item 12, correspondence action requested that the correspondence received from G. Lirondelle and Mr. Lowe be referred to the bylaw enforcement manager for investigation and response. Councillor Stoner?
I move it and then I'll speak to it.
Moving that, seconded by Councillor Reese. Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, just briefly, this correspondence came in early March and I think should have been on our last agenda. So just wanted to highlight for staff if we could get a response sooner rather than later, then that would be great, and appreciate the offer from SORCA to provide some support on the education and outreach component here. So hopefully we can take them up on that.
Thank you. Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. There was a letter from Mayor Braun for council consideration.
Move to
French?
receive.
So French moves receipt. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Stoner. I'm just watching councillors. It looks like some people are just going back to remind themselves what Mayor Braun's letter was about. All right. Any opposed? Motion carries. There is a letter from A. Barford, a letter for Squamish from Stand.Earth for council consideration. Councillor Pettengill?
Move to receive, but I will speak to it if there's a seconder.
Seconded by Councillor Herford. Go ahead, Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, just with the last letter and this one, if I understand them correctly, they're asking for our support at UBCM. So I think it's appropriate to receive and consider how we'll vote at UBCM and or LMLGA. The second one, it does resonate with me and can't help but think about the acid rock drainage too from the proposed Fortis drilling and how all that falls apart, or hopefully doesn't fall apart, but pulls together. Anyways, it's a topic worth considering, and happy to receive this and think about it for UBCM.
I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. And then we've had a number of pieces of correspondence regarding pest management spraying plan for BC timber sales. Councillor Anderson?
I'd like to move that this item be received for information. And if there's a seconder, I'll speak to that.
Seconded by Councillor Race. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, these are rather widespread issues and concerns raised by citizens around the province. The particular letters we have in front of us, however, I think are not, I won't say that they're lacking orientation, but they don't provide orientation regarding the pest management plan as an instrument. If those and we who are concerned about pesticide use in forestry, the areas that should be in focus are our management plans and our forest stewardship plans. The concerns that are raised in the letter regarding riparian zones and impacted lands for foods and medicine, among other concerns, this is where these are addressed, is in management plans and forest stewardship plans. And why I highlight this is that we are joint partners with the Squamish Nation in a joint venture community forest. And use of herbicides, and in particular glyphosate, are in fact addressed in our management plan and in the forest stewardship plan, which will be hopefully or predictably releasing to the public for comment. So there's a lot of public education, obviously, and information and dialogue that needs to take place. But for us here in Squamish, I suggest, and for us here in Council, we should point in the direction of the Squamish Community Forest Stewardship Plan as a public opportunity for input. We did have an opportunity for input a year and a half, 2 years ago with our management plan for the community forest, which also did address herbicide use. I could cite it, well, I will. It says that we will, if I can be quick, the Squamish Community Forest intends to avoid all uses of pesticides and herbicides unless no other practicable alternative is available for specific situations. The same paragraph chapter in the management plan addresses Squamish Nation concerns as well. So this is my suggestion, that we receive these letters for information and encourage participation and public input into our upcoming Squamish Community Forest Stewardship Plan, which does address herbicide use. Thank you.
Any other comments from council? Seeing none. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. We are on to surprisingly 14, because no one moved any correspondence from the consent agenda. It's rare, but it happens. So number 14, approval of minutes. We have recommendations from March 22nd, Committee of the Whole, that the District of Squamish enter a one-year service agreement with Sea to Sky Community Services for the provision of youth services, substantially in the form attached to the report from Community Services dated March 22nd, 2022. Moved by Councillor Herford, second by Councillor Stoner. Any comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up, this is our 5-year financial plan bylaw, which we already voted on for first 3 readings. So I'm not going to read this out. You're moving that, Councillor Herford? Seconded by Councillor French. Any opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none. We don't have anything under item 16. Anything under 17? We do not have any unscheduled public attendance tonight. Open question period. So anyone here in City Hall or online that has a question of clarification this evening? All right. Councillor staff announcements. I'll go Councillor French, Councillor Anderson, Councillor Pettingill.
Thanks, Mayor. I attended the 20th anniversary memorial for Constable Weil Audi last Tuesday with Councillor Pettingill and yourself, Mayor Elliott. A team of people made the event happen, and Robert Dykstra, the officer in charge of the Sea to Sky RCMP, hosted the gathering. It was a touching memorial. Weil left a strong legacy in the 5 short years that he lived and worked in Squamish. The gathering brought together a number of people that I haven't seen in many years to share our stories of time spent well with Weil Audi. And I also wanted to point out that the Constellation Festival lineup was announced today with July Talk, Black Pumas, and Sarah McLaughlin headlining July 22nd to the 24th. You can see the list of the other musicians that are scheduled to perform on the festival website. I was listening to some of the artists today, and we'll know that the talent for this festival is diverse, a range of sounds. Tamara Sanders, Kirsten Andrew, and Patricia Heinzman are the three Squamish residents working hard with a team of people behind them to make the festival memorable for all of those who attend. So if you want to learn more about the festival, I encourage you to pop over to their website, which has been updated as of today.
Councillor Anderson, then I've got Pettingill, Stoner, Hereford.
Thank you. At the beginning of tonight's meeting, we we proclaimed Volunteer Week, April 24th to April 30th. Last March 19th, there was an event hosted by the Squamish Valley Golf Club that featured a special acknowledgement of a remarkable community volunteer. In fact, two, Hal Houston and his wife, Debbie. A number of organizations were present and different community activities that they were involved with, and there's a long list. Hal has been with the Curling Club executive for decades, and a long list of the things that he's done with that club for juniors, for seniors, repairing the ice, raising money, single-handedly raising thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars. Golf club organizing. Logger sports and his contribution there, the Brackendale Fall Fair, the Hospice Society was represented, Hal's achievement in fundraising for the Hospice Society. The Slow Pitch was represented, and the Squamish General Hospital. Numerous fundraising and programming initiatives involving Hal and Debbie over the years. So it's not so often we take and get that opportunity to acknowledge volunteers of this status of Hal Houston and Debbie. Well done by the organizers, and just in time for thinking of our volunteers here this month with Volunteer Week. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thank you. Just two things I'll touch on. The Garibaldi Estates engagements have started. I've been able to participate in a few, and it's just been really good, thoughtful engagement all around, and I'm really pleased with how those are progressing. So thank you to the staff that are organizing those and the community members that are coming out and sharing their thoughts. Just such great conversation. It really makes me pleased. We talked about national volunteer work earlier, and I mentioned Between Shifts Theater. I did have the opportunity to see Amy Reed, who's featured in Every Brilliant Thing, which was their last theater event. And wow, it was so intense and almost a one-person show, except they managed with that intensity and a really heavy topic to bring a lot of humor, lightheartedness, and audience involvement. And so the audience played the actors as well, and it was so well done and so powerful. It made me really proud to be from Squamish and proud of our volunteers, and thank you to Between Shifts and Amy Reed, and just a fantastic job all around. So thank you everyone who did that.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. I just wanted to share an update. Mayor Elliott and I were at the SLRD meeting a few weeks ago, but last week. And so just wanted to provide an update on a few things that might be of interest to council. We have a new CAO at the SLRD who started on March 7th. So Craig Dalton joins us. He was previously the city manager in Lethbridge, and he started on March 7th. So he's getting his feet under him, learning the interesting world of regional district governance. We approved the 2022 budget and the 5-year financial plan at the meeting. And then within that budget, it should be noted that we're bringing on a regional fire chief to help with broader fire services, as well as an increase in emergency management staff has been recognized as a key need in the regional district budget. So that'll be coming on board. And then a piece of work that I think would be of interest to council is we received a report on the Sea to Sky Trail South expansion. So just looking quite closely at the terrain and land use assessment for trying to extend the Sea to Sky Trail from Squamish down to Lions Bay. As many of you know that terrain, there's a lot of challenging areas, but the good news of the report is that there's also some low-hanging fruit and some interest from the board to try and prioritize getting some of that low-hanging fruit checked off the list sooner rather than later. In particular, one of the sections from Loggers to Shannon Falls was identified as one of those low-hanging fruit priorities. So interesting to see that report come forward and starting to understand how we might move that Sea to Sky Trail extension south to Lions Bay in some due time. I don't know if you have anything to add, Mayor Elliott, but that was my update.
That was a great update. Thank you, Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I'm going to jump back on the theme of volunteerism. And on Saturday night, it was a bittersweet night. I attended a going away party for Cliff Miller, who's for those of you that don't know, longtime volunteer in our community. I met him first in 1992 at the first SORCA meeting, so that's 30 years ago. And throughout, I don't even know how to sum up Cliff's involvement in truly shaping our community as we sit here, as we're hardwired for adventure. And I mean, this is the man that I think just went on his own and nailed up the mountain bike capital of Canada sign on the entrance into town and set about making it happen. So longtime president of SORCA, ran the Testamental as a volunteer and a volunteer organization for the duration of its run and its success in our town. And honestly, setting a standard for what community activism and volunteerism looks like for me as I was growing up. So he'll be sadly missed. And Powell River seems to be drawing all of our talents. So Powell River, you are about to receive Cliff Miller, who's a force of nature. So they're not ready, I know, for what he's going to bring there. So anyways, sad to lose another long-term community organizer and volunteer, but also it was great to take the time to celebrate those achievements and to get together with the whole cast of characters that I haven't crossed paths with nearly often enough over the last few years. So thank you to Cliff. And I can't think of anyone else that when news is out, then there's a sold sign on their lawn that they get an exit interview from one of our local news establishments. So that kind of sets the level that Cliff is currently. And I look forward to reading that exit interview to see what he has to say. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you. Council, we have a bit of business to finish in the close, so motion to close. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by... Oh, right, we recessed to close meeting. Sorry, that was a special meeting. All right, motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor, I think it was Herford, seconded by Councillor French. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, join me on the close linked.